Shake it, shake it, shake it for you.
10 most liberal places on the planet. Many people think that to get away from silly laws and conventionalities, one has to travel to the end of the world. Well, this world is full of places where police is not seen for years, taxes are not paid, and anarchy is king. Slab City, California. You probably saw Slab City in the movies. In the Sean Penn's film Into the Wild, part of the main character's adventures was filmed in this location. It appears at the site of a former military base. It emerged at the site of a former military base that was abandoned in the late 40s. In the 60s, homeless people started to come here, and then there were hippies. Right now, it is home to everyone who doesn't wish to live by the rules of civilization. It is believed that the laws of the United States are not applied here. At least the authorities won't pay too much attention to the drugs. The population rarely exceeds 300. In summer, many people move closer to the ocean. It is no wonder. There is no water and no sewage, and the electricity is generated by wind. Auroville, India. This utopian town was created in 1968. It was assumed that people here would live in peace outside of political and religious contradictions. Basically, it is not a single town, but a collection of half a hundred communes. Unlike many other similar territories, Auroville came into being with the authorities' approval. There is a law in India that regulates all issues of local administration. The main activities here are mostly meditation, yoga, religious practices, and welcoming tourists. Everything is very sightly, but there isn't a shortage of problems. The buildings get shabby, the beach is washed into the sea. Only 2,500 people live here, although initially it was designed for 50,000 enthusiasts. Freetown, Christiania, Copenhagen. The town was formed in 1971, right after the army left its barracks near the rampart. The territory located not far from the center was quickly inhabited by political idealists, musicians, artists, and drug dealers. The latter caused the most trouble, whereas the problem with the owner of the land, the army, was eventually settled. Heavy drugs were banned by the inhabitants of Christiania themselves. The Danish government was against hashish and marijuana. The police periodically storms the town and chases the drug dealers. So far, to no avail. It is a permanent residence to almost 1,000 people. Tower of David, Caracas. The investors thought of this as a 45-story skyscraper which should have become the financial center of Venezuela's capital. But due to the banking crisis, the finished building was abandoned and in 1994 became the tallest slums in the world, El Torre de David. This time it wasn't without politics. The inhabitants were the poor who couldn't find a place to live. At its height, there was 3,000 inhabitants who themselves managed to make the power and water supply. Some levels remained empty, while others were stuffed with people. Several years ago, the government started to relocate the inhabitants to other residences to finish the skyscraper. So far, the process is still ongoing. Kowloon Walled City, China. It emerged right after the Second World War as a result of an intergovernmental misunderstanding. The fort in the center of Hong Kong belonged to China, while the rest of the island to Great Britain. During the times of the Civil War in China, the fort stood deserted and was occupied by assorted outcasts. While the colonial authorities took their time deciding what to do with it, vast construction began. Prior to demolishing, 5,000 people lived there. It was the most densely populated place in the world. There were kindergartens, shops, clinics, brothels, and underground casinos. The main principle of the locals was not to pay taxes. Because of no planning and construction, there were no yards and no streets but narrow passages between the houses. In 1992, after the Chinese authorities got Hong Kong back, the Kowloon inhabitants were evicted and all houses were demolished. Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco. It was San Francisco's district of Haight-Ashbury in which the so-called Summer of Love took place. In 1967, about 100,000 hippies came to town from all over the world and literally occupied it. By that time, the neighborhood had long become the center of various youth subcultures, a place where drugs were sold freely and where the police was rarely seen. Today, the glory of the rioters' territory has long faded. The real estate went up in prices. The place is mostly frequented by musicians, tourists, and the most famous commune Carista that advocated free love ceased to exist in 1991. Grand Hotel Beira, Mozambique. This luxury hotel in Beira had had a bad luck. It was opened in the most touristic city of Mozambique, but the European tourists were reluctant to visit, so it was closed after 8 years. For decades it stood empty, and in 1992 it was given to refugees. Since then, about 1,000 people live there, some in the third generation. The interior of the hotel were marauded, furniture sold, parquet burned in stoves. Most of the inhabitants are engaged in illegal activities. The police doesn't enter the hotel. Only 2 rules work inside of it. Anyone can find shelter there, and all residents must respect each other. Manshia Nasser, or the Garbage City, Cairo. It appeared in 1969 when the Egyptian authorities evicted the Zabalin, or the garbage people, to the area of Mokattam Hills. 90% of its inhabitants collect garbage from the streets of Cairo, and they bring it here. On the first floors, the garbage is sorted. All organics is fed to pigs. The rest is recycled or burned on the roofs. According to official records, 262,000 people live here. The authorities do not interfere with the work of the Zabalin or in the life of their commune. However, the work of a garbage man is paid pretty well. As for the beggars, criminals, and drug addicts, they live in the City of the Dead. It is located not far away from the Garbage City. It is an old cemetery where people live right in the crypts. Dharavi, Mumbai. This district came into being back in the colonial times when the British gave a part of the island for the uncontrolled settlement, but the most active period of construction began after India became independent. Most of the buildings are houses several stories high, made up of debris, plywood, and tin. The garbage is thrown directly onto the streets, and there is no water or sewers. About 1 million people reside in such conditions. The police shows no interest in showing up in the area, but the crime rate is remarkably low. The local authorities became interested in the area only recently, when the vicinity started to lack free land for construction. Favelas, Rio de Janeiro. The slums on the outskirts of the city started to appear in the late 19th century. They were founded by beggars and criminals who were forced to live far away from the rich. But their present look they got in the late 1970s, when the rural population started to swarm the cities. Today, a quarter of the population of Rio, or 1.5 million people, live in the favelas. Most of them have no official employment, pay no taxes, and do not obey authorities. The slums are effectively controlled by bandit clans. To somehow solve the problem with the favelas before the Olympics, the army had to be brought to the slums.